Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I will be doing the medical explanation. So I will be explaining the normal swallowing process in detail, focusing on the anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics involved. So this explanation is intended for medical professionals, so I will be using technical terminology and focus on key structures and mechanisms in action. So to begin, I will be talking a little bit about the normal swallowing process. So the normal swallowing process, also known as deglutition, is a complicated and coordinated activity that involves multiple muscles, nerves, and phases, and these phases can be divided into four main phases, which include the oral prep, oral transit, pharyngeal, and esophageal phases. And each of these phases is important in ensuring that food and liquid are safely and effectively transported from the mouth down to the esophagus without entering the respiratory tract. Otherwise, it can cause aspiration. So in this phase, food is basically chewed and mixed with saliva to form a proper bolus, and the muscles that are involved in chewing include the masseter, which is this lower area, the temporalis, which is this higher area of the skull, and the lateral and medial pterygoids. So the cranial nerves that are involved in this phase include the trigeminal nerve, which controls the muscles of mastication, and the hypoglossal nerve, which controls the tongue muscles. So this phase involves the voluntary preparation of food into a bolus, like I mentioned, and it's basically positioning it for swallowing. So here I have a visual. So basically, in this visual, like this front area is basically the oral prep stage. So food is basically being chewed and mixed with saliva so that it can prepare for going back here. And then I will come back to this visual and explain the second phase. So during the oral transit phase, which is the second phase, the tongue plays a huge role in pushing the bolus against the hard palate of the mouth, which is the top area of your mouth, moving it to the oral pharynx through the oral pharyngeal port. So going back to this picture, the tongue is pushing the bolus, which is food that will be right here. It's pushing it up to the hard palate, positioning it so that it could go down to the oral pharynx, which is labeled right here, which is this area. So the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the tongue is what is primarily involved in this phase, controlled by the hypoglossal nerve. So this phase is still voluntary, and it involves the propulsion of the bolus to the back of the mouth, preparing it for the following phase. So the following phase, which is the pharyngeal phase, is where it includes a lot more muscle structure. So this involves the levator villi palatini, which helps in elevating the soft palate to seal the velopharyngeal port, preventing nasal regurgitation. So the suprahyoid muscles, which includes the mylohyoid, geniohyoid, digastric, and stylohyoid, assist in hylolaryngeal excursion, which is important for airway protection and upper esophageal sphincter opening. So in this picture right here, you can see it shows the mylohyoid right there, which is this area right here. The digastric anterior belly is right here, and then the top one is right here. And then the geniohyoid is somewhere along this area, it's just not labeled. And then the stylohyoid is right here, back here. So in this picture, it would be right here, this area. So so the following muscle structures that are involved in this phase are the pharyngeal constrictors, which include the superior, middle, and inferior constrictors. And basically what they do is they help elevate the pharynx and larynx during swallowing for basically guiding the food bolus into the esophagus. And then lastly, it's the long pharyngeal muscles, which include the stylopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, and palatopharyngeus, in which they also play a huge role in contracting sequentially to push down the food bolus down from the pharynx into the esophagus. So I will also be showing a visual. This is a lateral view of the pharynx. So the superior pharyngeal constrictors right there is going down to this area right here. Right there. And then the middle is this small area right there. And then the low one, the inferior one, is this area right here. Right there. And then the long muscles are, where are they? Those are over here. This is the pharynx also, but this is the front view. So the stylopharyngeus is right here, this green area. The levator veli palatine is right here too. And then the palatopharyngeus is this blue area. And then the salpingopharyngeus is this long orange area. So the green area, the blue area in the middle, and then the long orange area. Those are the long pharyngeal muscles. So the cranial nerve that is involved in this phase is the vagus nerve, which controls the pharyngeal muscles in this phase. And during this phase, the soft palate elevates to close off the nasopharynx. So in this picture, going back to this picture, the soft palate, which is this back area, it closes. It elevates to close off the nasopharynx, which is this area. So it prevents anything from going up into the nasal area to protect the airway. So in the esophagus phase, the bolus is then transported from the esophagus down to the stomach. And this phase involves both striated and smooth muscle fibers in the esophagus. And the vagus nerve is also involved in this phase, and it controls the esophageal muscles. And there's this thing called the peristaltic waves, which are rhythmic contractions of the esophageal muscles, and they basically move the bolus down the esophagus. And this phase is involuntary, and it ensures that the bolus reaches the stomach efficiently. So the coordination of these phases is very important for efficient and safe swallowing. Any disruption in this process or any disruption in these phases can definitely lead to difficulties in swallowing, known as dysphagia. That's why it's important to understand the detailed mechanics and neural control of swallowing, which helps in diagnosing and treating swallowing disorders. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tia, and I'm going to be doing the role play as if I was explaining a normal swallow to the adult patient. Hi, today we're going to be going over a normal swallow, and the process of this can seem complex and a little bit confusing starting off, but I'm going to break it down in a way that makes a little bit more sense. So to do that, I actually printed off some illustrations for us that we'll go through, and I always like to start off by breaking it down into the 4 stages. So normal swallow is done in 4 stages, and this illustration here is going to show that. So the 4 stages are oral prep, oral transit, pharyngeal, and esophageal stage. And in these illustrations, you're going to see almost that black little blob right there. That's going to be referred to as a bolus, which is just chewed up food. So before we get started, you can see just as a demonstration that the bolus starts in the mouth right here and through the stages ends up going down there, which will later be going into the stomach. So to break it all down, we'll start with stage 1. So like mentioned, this is the oral prep stage, and this is when food is in our mouth and is going to be chewed into that bolus, which is going to prep it to be later going down the throat and into the other stages. So after the food in oral prep stage is chewed, turned into that bolus, it's going to go into the oral transit stage. And in this stage, the bolus is propelled from the front of our mouth to the back of our tongue. Then moving down to that 3rd stage, which is the pharyngeal stage, this is when the bolus is moved from the throat into the esophagus. And to pause right there super quick, I also printed out this illustration for us to look at. And when we hear that word esophagus, I also like to refer to it as a food pipe. And it makes a little bit more sense when you do look at this. So you have the esophagus here, and then our stomach. So as you can see from our mouth, eventually getting to that stomach, food pipe. That's just an easy way I remember it. So when you hear that word esophagus in the explanation and through those stages, just think food pipe and it'll make a little bit more sense. And also is an easier way for me to remember as well. So going back to the pharyngeal stage, just to go over it again. So during this stage, that's when the bolus is moved through the throat into the esophagus, food pipe. And then we'll hit our last final stage, which is the esophageal stage. And this is after the food travels from the throat to the esophagus. The food moves through that esophagus and into the stomach. And that's in a normal swallow. But there is something that I'm going to head to my notes super quick on to go over and is super important to mention. So going back to that 3rd stage again, the pharyngeal stage. It's very important to note that in a normal swallow, that small flap that we have called the epiglottis is going to cover our trachea, or also known as the windpipe, to prevent food or liquid from entering the lungs. And if this fails to happen, that could lead to aspiration, choking, etc. So, to summarize everything we went over, because I know that can also seem like a lot of information, we have those 4 stages: the oral prep, oral transit, the pharyngeal, and the esophageal stage. So those 4 stages. So to summarize that again, a normal swallow is going to involve coordinated movements of the tongue, soft palate, muscles of the throat, esophagus to move the food or liquid from the mouth through the throat and esophagus into our stomach, while protecting that airway to prevent from choking, aspiration like mentioned. So again, normal swallow is when the muscles in our throat, mouth, esophagus properly work together to move the food or drink safely from our mouth to our stomach through these 4 different stages, which we'll say one more time: that oral prep, oral transit, pharyngeal, and esophageal stage. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me